Netanyahu's controversial address to Congress, accusing President Obama of supporting a deal with Iran that not only would not prevent the regime from getting a nuclear bomb, but would, in his view, pave the way for Iran to do so. CNN's chief national security correspondent Jim Sciutto is traveling with Secretary of State John Kerry in Montreux, Switzerland, where the negotiations with Iran are continuing. Jim, what was the reaction there to the Prime Minister's remarks?
Well, Jake, I'll tell you, the reaction was State Department officials making a point of saying that Secretary of State John Kerry did not listen to or watch the speech because he was, in their words, busy negotiating with the Iranians over this nuclear deal. In fact, we noted that the afternoon session began about a half hour before the Prime Minister spoke, continued on a good hour, hour and a half afterwards. That was the third 2-hour-long meeting today, the fifth in the last 24 hours. So I think that's the clearest demonstration as to what their focus here remains. I asked the Iranian foreign minister earlier today whether the Netanyahu speech would have an effect on the talks. He said, well, the Israeli prime minister is trying to inject conflict in the talks, but he said as well that there is a seriousness here, in his words, about addressing the issues and trying to get to a deal.
Jim, have they impacted the negotiations at all, or they're saying it's as if it's in a vacuum?
They're saying as if it's in a vacuum. I think you could take that as truthful. Secretary of State John Kerry is here under the direction of the president, and the president has clearly decided to move forward on these talks in the face of the negative counsel from his close ally in Prime Minister Netanyahu. So that's where they get their orders, and that's how they're proceeding. From the Iranian side as well, I think that Iranian officials would tell me that they're used to this kind of, in their words, bluster coming from Israel, so that they don't feel that effect. But listen, let's be honest, we do know, and all sides know, that it could have an effect in Congress. Do they push for more sanctions, either as a deal gets agreed to, or if it gets extended, or down the road? That's where the power lies, and that frankly could have an effect over time.
Jim Sciutto, thank you so much. Here to discuss the politics of today's speech, Jeffrey Goldberg, national correspondent for The Atlantic, and SajadPour. He's a former chief Iran analyst at the International Crisis Group and a senior associate at the Carnegie Endowment. Thanks to both of you for being here. Appreciate it. So much has been said about the friction between Obama and Netanyahu. Jeff, let me start with you. Lasting damage to the relationship between the two men done today, do you think?
Yes, but I think that was done before the speech as well. I think there's no trust between the two of them. I think that Obama feels that Netanyahu is actively trying to subvert one of his signature foreign policy goals. And I think it goes deeper than that, because I think that they want to, on the one hand, share intelligence, share analysis, but they feel that the Israelis are going to leak this out in order to subvert the talks. So in this coming period where there's going to have to be intense dialogue between these two allies, Israel and the United States, there's zero trust between the two leaders.
Kareem, what kind of impact do you think Netanyahu's speech has on the negotiators? I know the official line is it has no impact whatsoever, but that can't. We heard Zarif talking about it. They know of that. Do you think it helps the Americans make their case? Hey, this is the alternative if you don't do a deal?
No, I frankly think it makes it that much more difficult for the Obama administration to sell this deal to the U.S. public, and it makes it much more difficult for the Iranian negotiating team to take this case to the supreme leader and say that we got the best deal possible. I think, frankly, the people who are happiest today are the hardliners in Tehran, because the hardliners in Tehran have thrived in isolation. Further economic isolation, political isolation is more a carrot for them than a stick. And I think that they will now, if the deal doesn't happen, have a pretty good pretext to say, we showed flexibility. It was the Israeli Prime Minister and the U.S. Congress which blew this deal up.
Interesting. Jeffrey, Netanyahu said the world should hold out for a better deal.
A better deal.
Of course, we're all in favor of a better deal.
Right.
But he said the deal would need to not leave Tehran with, quote, a vast nuclear infrastructure and no easy path to the bomb. Is that deal possible?
No. I mean, that's the problem here, is that what he didn't do, he laid out a very eloquent case that Iran is a bad actor, but we got that.
Yeah.
We know that. He made a case that it's dangerous for them to have nuclear weapons. We got that. But what he didn't say was how do we get negotiations to actually work? He wants to expand this. He wants negotiations to deal with Iran's support for terror groups and Iran's support for aggressive insurrections across the Middle East. Well, that's fine, but that's going to blow apart the negotiation. So that's a choice. And he knows knows that. He knows that it's going to blow apart.
Jake, this is a very important point, because what animates members of Congress most about Iran is actually not their nuclear program. It's their role in the Middle East, in particular their rejection of Israel's existence, Holocaust denial, support for groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad.
And Assad.
And Assad.
Right.
So in the last couple of years, we've seen some Iranian flexibility on the nuclear file. We haven't seen any Iranian flexibility on the regional file. And so I think many members of Congress are already cynical, because they say, why should we take the boot off their neck if they're only going to have more funding to continue to do what they're doing? But the follow-up to that is, okay, what's the alternative? Do you have a better solution?
Right.
Netanyahu didn't present one today.
Right, and Jeff, as you know better than I, some of the people who are also think that the Obama administration is being naive when it comes to Iran are people like Saudi Arabia, the government of Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Turkey. They view, not only through the Sunni Shia prism, but they also view a nuclear Iran as a threat to the entire region, and there likely would be a nuclear arms race.
You basically have a situation in which every American ally in the Middle East thinks that Obama is being naive. And Obama's response to that is, look, do you want the Middle East to have a nuclear arms race or not? And this is the best path. It's not emotionally satisfying. It's not viscerally satisfying. But I'm your best shot at getting Iran to denuclearize, or at least be a year away perpetually from being a nuclear power. But again, it's a very, very hard sell in a region where Iran is making so much mischief.
And Kareem, one of the other issues has to do with the credibility of the Israeli prime minister, because, as has been pointed out by progressive publications and also President Obama, past things that Netanyahu has said about Iran's nuclear program being imminent, being weeks away, being months away, have not come true.
Mm-hmm. For 20 years, Jake, Netanyahu has been saying Iran is a few months or a few years away. So I think he does appear in many quarters to be the man who continuously cries wolf. I think there's another point here which is worth mentioning, which is the Iranian people, whom we're not talking about. You know, population of over 75 million people, desperate to emerge from political and economic isolation. In the past, they've always put the blame on their own leadership that puts ideology before national interests. I think there is a danger now, if this deal doesn't happen, that they start to put the blame on the Israeli prime minister. Up until now, Iran has had the least anti-Semitic, the least anti-Israeli population in the Middle East. I'm worried now that that dynamic could start to shift.
Very interesting. Kareem SajadPour and Jeffrey Goldberg, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.